it's really hard to estimate effort impact. I could spec out a project today using an LLM model, and maybe it'll take me 6 months to build it. And if I wait 6 months, maybe it'll take me 6 hours to build it. Now, not only does it take 6 hours instead of 6 months, but the output is way better. So the impact is way higher. Everything you knew about product management kind of gets thrown out the window. Hi, I'm Richard White, founder of Fathom AI, one of the top AI note takers. Really excited to have this conversation, getting to talk about how we think about how AI has changed product development, our Jenga model of software development that we use to build AI features, and how to get off the LLM treadmill.
For folks who don't know the name Richard White, and maybe you don't even know Fathom, would you just give a quick intro? Why should you be interested in this conversation today?
I'm a software engineer by trade, but kind of turned like product designer, jack of all trades, product person. We started Fathom about 5 years ago. Fathom now is like one of the top kind of AI note takers, joins your meeting, takes notes, figures out your action items, et cetera, et cetera. We started this company 5 years ago before Gen AI really ever kicked off. And we started with two hypotheses. One was we thought transcription cost was going to go to zero, and we thought Gen AI was going to get really good. We kind of believe that we shouldn't build models, but we kind of should apply models. And I think I was fortunate enough to have this insight because I've been kind of surrounded by like Y Combinator folks for about almost 20 years. And so people are investing in things like Anthropic and OpenAI. And I think kind of all in that 5-year journey from those hypotheses to those hypotheses clearly paying off, right? Transcription is basically free now, and Gen AI obviously works, unlike the AI that we had 5 years ago. I think two things that we've kind of discovered along the way is like, one, how Gen AI has kind of completely upended how I think about software development. We do software development for 20, 25 years, and it's almost completely inverted now. It's much more of an R&D process than it is a roadmap process. And I think also we think a lot about kind of what I call the Jenga model of product development with AI, as well as kind of like, when do we think about just internally when we buy or build basically AI automations within our org?
Sure.
Right? And like, how do we scope them and how do we decide? And when do we use our AI team and when do we not, sort of thing.
So maybe we could start there with the question of R&D versus, I can't remember exactly what you said, but I would love to start there.
Yeah, I mean, so I think if you've done product management, if you've done software development for the last 15 years, right? You kind of put stuff on the roadmap, and there's not a lot of risk in things you put on the roadmap, right? Technical risk, if you're doing SaaS, you're doing anything for the last 10, 15 years, technical risk wasn't a big component. The big challenge was kind of estimating effort and impact, right? We spent a lot of time trying to figure out those two things. And if you could do those two things accurately, you can pretty much have an optimized roadmap. I mean, this is what Zynga was pretty famous for 10, 15 years ago. They had amazing kind of quantitative prowess. And so they got really good at like knowing if we add this thing to Farmville, we'll see this lift, right? And that was the whole game. But now with like AI, it's kind of shifted in that it's really hard to estimate effort impact.
Yeah.
For example, effort shifts very quickly, right? I could spec out a project today using an LLM model, and maybe it'll take me 6 months to build it. And if I wait 6 months, maybe it'll take me 6 hours to build it.
Right.
As a new model
Right.
comes out,
Sure.
right? And then the other dimension, impact also shifts, right? Like that version I was going to build 6 months ago, that would take me 6 months to build because I was kind of brute forcing an LLM that really wasn't quite ready for that use case. Maybe now, not only does it take 6 hours instead of 6 months, but the output is way better. So the impact is way higher. And so it's kind of funny now. It's like everything you knew about kind of product management kind of gets thrown out the window. And you kind of have to think of a new model.
Do you feel you already have changed the way that you build? I'm asking because I have businesses that are big, like I started at public listed, blah, blah, and then I've involved in new companies. And there's obviously a completely different mindset in the companies that have been started in the last 24 months because they almost have been able to go completely to this kind of new AI stack where the organizational design is a little bit different because a lot of people can do a lot of different things. And software, for example, is often pitched now in actually functionally code that is being basically submitted as in like, do you want to merge this to the master copy already, right? Rather than just kind of like a concept and a wireframe and design, blah, blah, blah. When you have a company that's 5 years old, but that's born basically on AI, do you feel you kind of have to morph your organization and way of thinking about it just because you're 5 years old? Or do you think that you kind of are already in the new way of operating?
I mean, I think there's kind of two sides of where I think AI has an impact. One is taking away kind of a lot of the grunt work of software development, which I think is what you're alluding to. It's like, I wouldn't want to be a front end engineer in 2026, right? Like a lot of that stuff just gets generated automatically. There's the other side of it, which is like if you're actually building AI features yourself in your product, the way you think about vetting and building them also is very different. I would say we're still kind of traditional in the first sense because Fathom is actually not a traditional kind of SaaS product. Traditional SaaS product is candidly just a lot of forms and workflows, right? A lot of our technical engineering challenges are actually one of like, it's a distributed system that's a real-time system that it has to be highly reliable. And, we try to get you your transcripts and your meeting recordings and your summaries within 30 seconds of the meeting ending. And we're trying to do it for hundreds of thousands of people a day. That's like a big technical challenge that's way beyond what you can have spit out of Claude code today. But on the other side, when it comes to like building AI features, yes, I think we've completely shifted how we build AI features. And I think one of the things I see people get wrong about this, and I talk to people all the time, it's like, they already have an engineering team and they're like, great, I've got 10 engineers. 3 of them are now going to start building AI features. And that means they're going to start writing the prompts, figuring out which models, figuring out how to host the models, et cetera, et cetera. And the one big shift that we made that I think has been paid a lot of dividends is we kind of separated out the what model, what prompt, what pipeline from the how do we host it, how do we serve it, like how do we scale it. And so we have a separate team that's kind of, we call it just the AI team, AI engineering team. And they spend all their time just kind of honestly kind of just prototyping. And they use tools like Magic Patterns to kind of make really high fidelity functional prototypes, but it's all in service of writing a spec. Right? They throw away that prototype and that output is a spec that then goes to engineering. Hey, here's the 5 models we're going to use to build a feature that finds action items, right?
That makes a lot of sense.
And what's challenging about it is that like the surface space continues to grow, right? In that like 24 months ago, it was like, well, we've got Claude 2 and we've got GPT-4. And we kind of, play with, well, Claude 2 is better at some of these things, GPT-4 better at these. Well, now we've got Gemini, OpenAI, Anthropic, as well as like we got DeepSeek, we got Qwen, we got all these sorts of things, right? And so I kind of teach this, we call it the Jenga model. So it's like you play Jenga, right? Like push on a block. And you know how to play. It's like if you could play the game where you get to touch the block, right? Some people don't play the rules. Once you touch it, you're committed to it. Let's assume you're playing where it's like I can touch the block and I can untouch it.
Wait, are those the
You
rules?
push on
Just as an aside, are the rules of Jenga that once you touch, you have to try
I
that?
didn't even know.
Technically, yes.
Okay.
I believe it's like.
And so do you enforce those rules with AI, or are you saying you're
No.
looser? You touch, you go, whoa, 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 that's going to move the tower.
Yeah. We're much more the house rules that I think everyone plays. Where it's
Yes.
like you can kind of drill some test wells so you can touch it, right?
Okay.
And I think about blocks in the Jenga tower being kind of models and use cases, right? And so if you push on a block and it, you get resistance, our thing is find another block,
Yeah.
right? That means that model is not the right tool for the job.
Well,
so we're looking for where's
but
it
I
easy.
like that where you said model and use case, right? Because sometimes the challenge is the use case is the wrong use case for the model. And other times the model is the wrong model for the use case. And what you're saying is even having that kind of fluidity as a development team, hey, if you're trying on this use case, try these 4 models and see and kind of do a horse race. Or if you're working in this model and you're not making progress in this use case, you've got a whole tower. Is that how do you think about, if just to use your metaphor, where does the tower of use cases live? If a developer is trying to think of what are other blocks I could push on, is that in an internal kind of leaderboard of ideas in the organization? Where do they go to find blocks?
And so this is where it really differs from traditional software development, right? I meet with our AI team once a month and we kind of just brainstorm. Like, they have a lot of context on the product. They kind of know what kind of things we're talking about. They've got my wish list. I'm like, I wish we had this feature. I wish we could do this. I wish we could do that. I always tell them like 60% of what we explore should probably be coming from the wish list of things that myself and the product team have brainstormed. But I give you carte blanche to go, if you just think of something, this new model came out and I think you could do this thing really well, go for it, right? And that's why it feels true like an R&D team.
Yes.
We don't say exactly, here's what we want you to build. We say, here's the universe of things we're trying to build. We're going to give you as kind of artisans, right? Like the charter to go explore in that universe.
It's so
and
interesting.
I think the key thing is
It's brilliant.
we're going to give you also the opportunity to fail. And that's the other thing engineering teams can't get. Like the AI team should be failing like 50% of the time at things.
We have this feature in one of the companies I'm involved in where something takes a bit of time, like 30 seconds, 60 seconds. And so somebody built a little snake game that the end user could play while they were waiting, and is like completely random, but hugely popular now, right? And so now there's like a score.
Now they actually want it to take longer. That's great.
Exactly right.
Okay, wait, you said an AI team should be failing 50% of the time. Say more about that because and there are two ways that I think one could take that statement from the CEO of the organization. One is I tolerate 50%. I'm not concerned. If you fail, no big deal. The other way to take that is team, you're succeeding too much. You aren't trying bold enough things. I want to see you fail more. Can you talk about those two kind of aspects of it?
I mean, I think it's both, right? I think we have a reasonable appetite for risk here. Let's go throw things at the wall. I think we want you to go try things you're not sure are going to work. And there's a number of times we put things on there like, this is kind of a Hail Mary. Occasionally those things actually work, right? It's kind of surprising in LLM land that sometimes you
That's
throw a Hail
cool.
Mary and you catch it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's an important part of it. And I think it's also what kind of keeps it fun. So it's a little bit pressure on taking risk. And it's also back pressure on sometimes people go down a rabbit hole and get stuck,
Yeah.
right? It's like, cool, don't bang your head against the wall for weeks on this. But yeah, push on the block, see if you get resistance, move on to the
How
next
is it
block.
managing psychology here? I don't know if you guys have watched The Thinking Game yet. It just came out about Demis and, the whole deep learning and neural networks, et cetera. One thing that they had a kind of a cutaway with Paul Nurse, who is a Nobel Prize winning biologist, I think. He's the CEO of the Francis Crick Institute now at Harvard. But one of the things he said, which I love, which is so applicable here, he said, I've been running a research lab for the last 50 years. He said 90% of the time, I'm an amateur psychiatrist helping people work through how they feel failing so much. And I wonder if you, Richard, do you feel that way? Like, how is it for engineers who maybe have been trained in a world of deterministic models and code verification, and probably they went to elite universities, they've always succeeded. Are you having to play the role of psychiatrist amidst failure, or how is that going for you?
So I think two things on this. One is the profile of the engineer on our AI engineering team is very different than the profile of the engineer on our core engineering team.
Say more.
They're often much earlier in their career. They generally have, I think we found a lot of success with folks that have, usually some advanced degrees. At least they have an appetite or generally they're comfortable reading white papers. We've seen like people that read white papers pretty regularly or like have had that kind of muscle, like they know how to read and evaluate things. They make better decisions when it comes to, oh, this new model came out. I understand what this new model can do. And so they have to guess and test a little less. But it doesn't look like, I don't think from an engineering perspective, any of them have the kind of engineering background or at least the experience level that would ever get them on our core engineering team. And my argument is like, we've had to be like, oh, I want to get on the core engineering team. It's like, why? That core engineering team is not going to be relevant in 10 years. What you're doing is going to be relevant in 10
Okay.
years, right?
Let's revisit that because
Um,
that's interesting, but continue.
but yeah, so it looks very different, right? So the folks much earlier in their career. And so I think naturally that probably lends to a little more optimism. Um, that's one thing I'll say. The other thing I'll say is we're a fully remote company. I love fully remote. I'm like a huge fan of it, mainly because I like to work from anywhere and I hate going to an office. Having said that, the one team that raised their hand and said, we want to be in an office together was our AI engineering team. And you know, it's their R&D lab. So sometimes we try to pair them more than our typical engineers because I think it's easier to fight, to your point about psychology, it's much easier to be two of you against a problem, right?
Mhm.
Than just one of you. And so I think that in-personness is helpful where they can be like, oh, I'm banging my head against this. Give me a look at this. Oh, da, 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 right. So I think there's something to that.
Can I ask a little bit different? You are kind of an expert in kind of communication, right? You last company was kind of customer communicating to a company. Now you're kind of like sit in the middle of people communicating to people. As we talk about AI become this Iron Man suit, where do you think that AI currently provides most value outside the pure kind of transcription? Do you have like a way of thinking about how we should all be using this to really get the benefits?
My good friend Emmett Shear, who was CEO of Twitch and is now off doing a new AI startup, has like this good mental model where he kind of describes LLMs in kind of GPT-3 was like I think like a sophomore in high school,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
GPT-4 was like a senior in high school, and so we talk a lot about like what would you, now in the modern LLMs you're getting into like okay now we're into like clearly into college, some of them even post grad,
Yeah.
and so like if you had an intern that was this, what would you have them do, sort of thing. Um, and I think what's been kind of exciting for us is, like I mentioned, we built this business assuming Gen AI would show up eventually, and it'd be like, we're going to go build the rest of the car, and eventually someone's going to just show up and drop off a new engine. We're going to drop it in. And 2 years ago, the state of the art for us was AI can just write really good notes on a meeting, right? It can do, again, things you would imagine a college intern scribe could do. Now we've like, cool, I think we can take really good notes for you. We can take really good action items. We can do all that sort of stuff. Now the frontier for us is moving to the next phase. And I think it's even more exciting, which is now that it's the scale of that college intern. It's not just one college intern. It's a college intern that actually has 800 hours a day
Right.
and can watch every meeting that's happening at your company. And then you each have one of these people and they can basically curate from those 800 meetings the 10 minutes you need to see. And so we're kind of moving towards this world where AI is actually a source of insight across an org, as opposed to just being like it's a scribe in your meetings, right? That's just taking away some rote low value work. It is now kind of a second brain kind of thing.
Is that when you think about the future of Fathom, is that, not to get you to kind of make forward facing statements or something, but like, do you see connecting if you're taking notes in everybody's meetings, you probably are far better positioned to make insights across meetings than any individual, perhaps. Is that the future? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's two dimensions that we get really excited about. One is, look, people don't like meetings, right? Why do they not like meetings? Well, they hate having to like talk and take notes at the same time. It's kind of stressful. Cool, we've gotten rid of that. They also hate.
No, you haven't. I'm doing it right now. If okay, I would actually put that to you as a challenge, as a separate thing. If you could help me and Henrik actually be more present, I find like I have to re-listen to these conversations because I am scrambling so fast to take notes and think about that. By the end of the conversation, it's as if I didn't even have it. And when I listen to it, when we release, I'm like, man, that was amazing. But it's really, I mean, to your point, it's the ultimate challenge of listening and taking notes.
I, on the other side, don't ever take a single note, and I'm fully reliant
He's
on
perfectly
the
happy.
transcript.
He's perfectly happy.
That's because, among other things, like what's he called, Jensen from NVIDIA, he had this kind of pretty cool video out where he says, I don't even do long-term planning. The only thing I focus on is trying to be better at what I do right now. And I actually thought, and if we know that, I think it was 49% of everybody is lost in daydreaming, like throughout the day. And we know of happiness research that if you daydream of something bad, that's the worst. If you daydream something good, that's the second. If you do not daydream, if you're fully present, you are more happy than the two other ones. And so I am now on a 2026 kind of crest of just trying to be ever more present.
Okay, so as the rabbit trail coming back, Richard, to the future, you're saying nobody likes to be in meetings because they're simultaneously taking notes. Please continue.
I will say I didn't know that Jensen quote. That's fantastic. I actually am a huge anti-fan of planning. I do not like planning. I think planning is false precision in most companies, right? Like we have big goals about where we're going, but we don't do sprints. We don't do estimates. We don't do quarterly, I try to get my team every day to like, what's the highest leverage thing you could do today to like improve the org? Anyways, as an aside.
I agree with that.
Okay, but hang on. Sorry, we're going to go on a tangent here for just a second. I agree 100%. I was reading a book that one of our listeners actually recommended to me called Primal Intelligence, which shout out to Simon Wallace-Jones who recommended it. It's written by someone who runs a lab at Ohio State, I think. And he's been working with special forces in developing kind of a framework around primal intelligence. And I haven't gotten through the book. I kind of question the premise, but I just share this with you all in case it's interesting as fellow nerds. He said one of the core elements of primal intelligence is imagination and our ability to imagine possible futures and things like that. And he said he was asking these Army Rangers, they're in the middle of a war zone. They're responding instinctively, imaginatively to unexpected challenges. And he said, as if it was a difficult question, he said, how do you train your imagination? And the response he got from this Army Ranger colonel was planning. And what's interesting is, and I'm very much like y'all, I actually stopped reading the book right there because I was like, I don't buy that. I don't know what you think about that, but I can understand.
Can I just cut into the things? And Richard, we're sorry, we're going more on tangents than we normally do.
This is great.
I'm also super fascinated with this book that I've talked about on this podcast a lot called Why Greatness Can't Be Planned, The Fallacy of the Objective. It's an AI researcher that basically trying to talk about how we get to AGI. But his point is all big systems comes from open-endedness. And this idea that we can kind of predict it and then just find the resources to get there is a fallacy in his mind. And I think in many ways for entrepreneurship, it's a very good kind of philosophy because he basically say that you should follow with great intensity, your interestingness, and then that would create stepping stones, and then you land somewhere good if you're lucky. And I actually think that's a better articulation of a strategy than this. If you can see it, you can make it kind of way of thinking about it.
Well, since we're doing literary references, I'll throw to one of my favorite quotes is Eisenhower, and another military guy, and he's like, planning is essential, plans are useless, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it's the same thing for Fathom, right? Like, we had a plan, we planned, we thought about how we do go to market, we thought about where Gen AI was going, but we didn't try to. I think it's the intermediate part where you try to make it too much of a concrete artifact, right? Cool. We think a lot about the future.
Finally, the plan becomes the whole objective instead of like what customers are telling you or what your intuition is
Correct.
saying.
That's cool.
Correct. Yeah.
That's cool. I think
especially if you think in AI land, we do product roadmap webinars to customers. Our product roadmap does not go more than 60 days out because we want to give ourselves also the license to, oh crap, this new model came out. R&D team just dropped this, just put this extra precedent under the tree. Like, we want to be able to follow that, right? I think it really behooves you to be very fluid in your kind of execution.
Can you talk for a second about when you think about organizing the team, there's a group of, it sounds like your core engineering team is kind of working on core engineering challenges, and then the AI team is more exploratory in nature. I think a lot of organizations, a lot of folks that we talk to, especially more kind of conventional companies, it's very difficult to carve out resourcing at all for exploration. They're 99.999% core eng team. How do you think about the proportion of executing and exploring, just even from a high level conceptual, and how do you build the kind of ROI case to yourself as the single fiduciary responsible for, returning capital to investors, et cetera, et cetera?
It probably varies on what you're building needs to be, infused with AI, like how core AI is to what you're doing, right? I imagine that ratio of kind of core engineering to that probably is based on how technically challenging is the core product and like how much AI is in it, right? So for example, we have about a 4-to-1 ratio of like core engineers to AI engineers. If we were just more traditional SaaS app, if we didn't have this like big distributed system scaling problem every day, I'd imagine that ratio would be more like 2-to-1, right? We have less core engineers, more AI engineers. We were more just like some other traditional software product that has small AI features. I imagine that ratio would go back to being 4-to-1. I think the thing though, if I'm running a bigger company, here's the actual thing I think you need to worry about building AI features. You don't know how to build them. And the reason you don't know how to build them is because it's also broken QA. And what I mean by that is like historically on the QA side, it's pretty easy. We write unit tests, we write integration tests, someone clicks a button. Yep. It did the thing we expected to do. It's really easy in AI land to get it to spit out something. The binary of like, it spit out something used to be like, that worked. It moved to the next form. It submitted the field sort of thing. But now you also need almost like there's artistry to AI, which kind of why I like it. A lot of our AI team, like I said, they've got a background sometimes in machine learning. They also have a background in data. And data people backgrounds we've done really good because data people have a high tolerance for pain. And by what I mean is a lot of data people spend their time doing data integrity. If you've ever done anything with data integrity, it is nothing but pain.
Brutal.
It is like
Brutal.
Look at hundreds of rows of things and figure out why it's wrong 2% of the time. And it literally is still that, yes, you can have LLMs evaluate other LLM outputs. And we tried that as well. But at the end of the day, there's right now no substitute for someone who cares deeply about the problem, just eyeballing 200 answers. Sure, you could set up some feedback loops with your users and stuff too. But like, you're going to get so much more variance from a team that really cares deeply about the output and really scrutinizes it. And I think that one of the reasons why all these large companies kind of aren't very good at shipping, when they're traditional software, aren't very good at shipping AI features because they have no taste. And because they have no taste, they just don't know how to QA this. And so it spits out something and they ship it. Again, they're probably also on deadlines. So they're not giving their team time to fail and time to keep iterating it. So that's why I think all of those things are pretty mediocre.
Click one more into they have no taste, because I think that if I'm at a big company, that could just seem like a spurious insult, but I think there's real substance there. How do you define taste, and how could someone develop it if they want to develop it?
I think it's like we have to move to a world where we figure out how to QA with qualitative feedback, right? Not something that can be automated. And I think in these larger companies, that kind of qualitative feedback and a QA process happens at smaller companies almost organically because you don't have yet the apparatus. You're not investing the time to do these big unit tests. But I think you tend to move away from that as you scale. And so I think, when I say taste, I just basically mean like you need to come back and reemphasize the qualitative side of testing some feature or output that you're getting from an AI product?
I would imagine that the other thing is to have a little bit of consistency, because it's so easy to produce so many different things. You end up having some of these tools being thrown at you that just does a lot of like thing. And I've always been thinking about what is a founder's kind of role. And in many ways, I think about it in the context of Steve Jobs. My sense is that Apple was very consistent for a long time because people basically asked themselves, was Steve Jobs like this? And it became
Right.
this kind of like really easy way to QA stuff because you can just
Right.
go like, he probably wouldn't like it, or he would like it. And if he would like it, he would put it in. And so I think in many ways, I'm increasingly obsessed with this narratives becoming source codes, almost like that. If you don't have a strong story about what it is that you want to be as a company, but you just define yourself of what you do, you have this very difficult time to basically share that articulation. And therefore people don't really know if a feature that works in this way or that way should go in or not.
It's funny you say that because my knee-jerk answer to your last question about if you're a large company, how do you get taste or whatever, is I think someone in the executive suite has that taste. They need to be stepping into the QA process. They
Yeah.
need to start doing themselves. They need to start basically being the backstop and start, creating a culture around
Like
that.
Steve
that
did,
is,
just like Steve did.
like Steve did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so fun. I think it's so important. I remember like at BarkBox, for example, we had this kind of rule called band the bone. And the band the bone was that I would have a little bit of a theatrical hissy fit if I saw somebody design anything with a bone. Because obviously when you design stuff for dogs, the most obvious thing to do is a bone, right? All paw print.
Ban the bone.
And I just didn't want designers to be that lazy. It just
Yeah.
meant that they just done their homework, right? Somebody asked me to design something, here's like a paw print and a bone.
That's
And
so
so
good.
this ban the bone became a thing, but people didn't remember the rule. They remember that Henrik would get upset, right? And so sometimes when you had a new designer come on board and they design something with a bone or paw print, people go like, "Oh, have you shown this to Henrik? I'll better not show this to Henrik," right? And I think actually it's increasingly going to be important for us, to your point, to create these almost like folklores or these systems, because obviously not only will people have to understand them, but models will have to understand them too.
Yeah. Well said. So Henrik, I love your phrase, just to put a double click on it. Narrative is source code. I think it's beautiful. And that word code reminded me of something there goes my notebook. Something we talked about with Wade, actually, Richard, which I'd love to get your thoughts on. So back in, what was it? Was it 23? Was it when GPT-4 came out, Henrik, that Wade declared code red at Zapier?
Yep.
And he basically said, everybody take 2 weeks off work because the period of time between 3.5 and 4 and the capability improvement was so significant. Wade and Mike Knoop, his co-founder, basically said, we need everybody to stop everything they're doing and go deep. I contrast that slightly with your story. It sounds like you had an intimation through the grapevine, so to speak, that Gen AI is kind of coming down the pipe. And you actually said, what will we build if we assume somebody's going to do that thing? So I don't know if you didn't pre-code red in a way, but you kind of built with that mindset. And then the third kind of piece of this puzzle, I'd love for you just to riff on if you're willing. I've heard one strategy people talk about is in enterprises, what would we be if we could start today, right? Knowing that AI is now here, and that's actually, I think, a really difficult thing to imagine, but think about those kind of three things. You started knowing it's coming. What should I build? Wade said, oh, crud, it's here, code red. And then there's this kind of existential, what would we do if we started over? How should an organization think about AI and its kind of existential connection to the business?
Okay. So to go back to my, we don't like plans, but we had a plan, which was,
Right. Right, of course.
we had kind of almost like a 4-step plan here, right? For Fathom going back 5 years ago. One was, okay, we believe Gen AI is coming. It's not here yet. What should we build before it gets here? What we're going to do is work on all the things around the engine of the car. We're going to work on distribution channels. We're going to work on video streaming, transcription, like all the plumbing. We think that part's really hard. We're going to intentionally not try to build our own models because we know that they're coming. We saw a bunch of competitors hire linguists and ML people, and we thought that was the wrong move. Then GPT-4 gets here, right? Create. We can drop that engine out. It can take notes. It can use that existing infrastructure to take notes. We always thought the step after that, sort of talking about earlier, is it not as just like a scribe, but as like a second brain. And so we kind of built almost another car with another engine. Maybe it's a bigger car, a bigger engine cavity, thinking about okay, when it gets to this threshold where we can actually horizontally scale it cheaply enough that we can have it do kind of massively parallel analysis of thousands of meetings at once to answer any question you've got. Great. Now we're in this phase. And then there's a phase beyond that where it's not just answering questions you ask, it's going to start pushing you to answers. And so the world we're really excited about is the world where you get off the meeting and it's done 80% of your action items for you. And also, by the way, you're in a third of the meetings used to be, because now you just have an agent that runs around and finds all the topics you care about and feeds them back to you at the end of the day. And so we haven't really had to remake these things because we already had like almost when it hits its capability, smash that red button. It's time for us to pause the assembly line and like rework it.
So you've kind of pre-built some of this infrastructure, so to speak, and you're waiting for the new model to drop in. So is what happens, Gemini 3 comes out, you go, let's drop in Gemini and see if it's got enough horsepower. Is that what you're doing?
Basically, yeah. There's certain limitations that we run into, and we're always looking for, does this new model unlock one of those limitations? Good example of this is GPT-5. GPT-5, I think, in the marketplace has been kind of panned, right? Not the most exciting launch. To us, it's the most exciting launch we've seen in almost over probably 18 months.
Why so?
Because it solved hallucination rates. And for us at scale, when we're trying to find needles in a haystack, trying to look at 2,000 meetings, we're trying to find, you're curious about something that only happened 0.1% of the time, 0.5% of the time. If the hallucination rates pre-GPT-5 are high enough that, well, two-thirds of what we're going to return you is hallucinated. And so like, it's interesting where it's like, hallucination rates are not a thing that matters if we're just writing notes because it doesn't get it wrong. But when we're doing that use case, it matters a lot. And so we do have, I think, we're on the lookout for certain things. The other thing is we kind of know there's a lot of times it's like, we can make this work today, but it's too expensive and too slow, which are basically the same thing in AI land, right? Cost and speed are the same thing. You don't want to ask a question of Fathom that takes 30 minutes to get an answer. Right. But if we can make it work in 30 minutes, that means we can probably put it on the shelf. And if we wait another LLM cycle or two, it'll get down to 30 seconds. And that'll be both a latency and a cost we can stomach. So sometimes we use expensive models to like prototype out like, okay, if the expensive model can do it, we see it, we can't build it yet, but like it's coming.
Curiosity, going back to your insight in how we as users should use a product like yours better. I read somewhere that if you have a partner for a long time, you basically, and you do CAT scannings of their brains, there are like whole parts that you basically turned off because you assume your partner remember it, right? So if you're really good at maps and I'm not, then I don't have to deal with maps anymore because my partner doesn't. Is the way to think about it is that is kind of becoming these systems that you're creating, these basically libraries of everything that's been said in meetings are becoming this kind of very extended memory. And if you have that, what is the stuff that people are not doing today, but they would get a lot of benefit from?
I think the thing we see a lot of is you come to Fathom and you're trying to get Fathom to approximate your current workflow, which Jeremy's illustrating well, right? He's taking notes the whole time. He's going to clean it up, et cetera, et cetera. He's going to spend a lot of time with it so that it kind of like sinks into his brain. And when people first come to Fathom, that's what they get excited about. Oh, wow, it took really good notes for me. But very quickly you realize like, I don't even need those notes. I don't need them now. What I need them is when I go meet with Jeremy again in 2 weeks. And so instead of me I don't review my notes after any meeting. I just have the meeting. I go on the next thing. It's when I have the follow-up or when I need to do something about that meeting. Now I go back to the meeting and I ask the question, hey, what did we say we were going to do here? Or I watch the last 2 minutes or I read the summary. And then I go into the next call, just having reviewed that before. So it's kind of like a just-in-time memory system. So instead of putting all this work up front to try to like prime your brain to remember these things in the future, just when you need it, come back to it.
I did a fun use case just recently. So I write a Substack like other people have a podcast, and it has the same format as like these 8 to 10 points, and it's very structured. But it's a little bit of a chore to make it because I want it to be high quality, blah, blah, blah. So what I do now is as you suggested, I feed it my last 20 newsletters. And then it basically says, go through all the meetings I've had the last month or so and take anything that is interesting enough that I can package in the same way and then give me a source. And then, hey, presto, of course, it like finds all these interesting things that Jeremy has said. I'll then repackage them in my words. And then it works very well because then
I've wondered about that. I feel like a lot of my ideas are in your newsletter. What's up with that? No, but okay. When you say go through,
I think
your
that's
meetings,
a good example.
What is it going through?
Example. It just goes through all my meetings. Because I
in
don't
what
remember
format?
where
In Granola, in Fathom, what does it mean to go through
like
meetings?
I use this local model because some people get freaked out, use cloud stuff, and you probably have a solution for that. So I use Mac Whisper, which I think is an open source thing. But
And
it's
it's
a
just
Fathom
taking
type of
notes
product.
all the time.
It just records everything and stores it, right? So this conversation will be in there, and then
It's like a whole transcript, I'm imagining.
Richard's point, like in 2-3 months when I've forgotten about all these smart things that Richard said, then it will find that point, and then I go, oh yeah, I remember that. That's actually is a really interesting point. I should have put that in my newsletter. But it's a workflow that just couldn't have happened before, because to your point, I didn't have the transcript, and I didn't even know that this was something that could be done.
And I think this is like the evolution of AI as first like an assistant, like a scribe doing a specific job for you, to AI as like a co-creator with you, right? And now I think we're very much into like, we're co-creating things. So I'm good at some parts of this process. It's good at some parts of the process, right? It's much better at memory than we are. We're much better at taste than it is, right? So like, I'm guessing you have some editing process that gives you a bunch of stuff, and you're like, these two are good, those two are bad, right?
Exactly right.
And then I think the next phase is honestly, it starts, we start becoming, it starts maybe surpassing us, and then it starts suggesting things with less of a co-creation, and we're more of like a Steve Jobs, where we're just kind of approving thumbs up and thumbs down.
But can I give you one thing that I just thought was an interesting, like that I've been talking more on this podcast than you have, so I apologize for that. So one of the companies I'm involved is called Autos, and we help people build startups with AI. And we had a journalist from a major publication go through this process, and he ended up building something that basically helped him navigate his parents getting older. So like what kind of nursery homes could be, stuff like that. And so the system built the website and all these different things. And then he basically started to get real customer through. And I think what he then realized was like, this might actually be a decent business, but not for me. I don't want to build that business. And so it's not just about taste. It's also just about preference, right? Like I don't want to be the one who posts that specific thing. Like it's just not for me. And so I think there's like an interesting use taste earlier, which I think is such a profound thing, but it kind of like very much dovetails in with just preference. And of course, AI can't pick your preference because it doesn't know you well enough yet.
Like all things in AI, we always you got to throw yet on the end so that you look smart in the future, right? Yeah.
One thing I'd be curious about, Richard, is can you talk for a second about organizational rhythms, rituals, mechanisms to drive exploration and adoption? One word actually that has not come up yet is adoption. You haven't spoken and that's not a criticism. It's some people talk, their entire thing is adoption. Yours, clearly not. And as an example, I'll mention, we had Humza Tehrani, who's the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer at Maple Leaf Sports. So over the Toronto Raptors and the Maple Leafs and their soccer team and their arenas, he has a running list of ideas that get submitted by employees. And once every quarter, they have what they call a build day. And whatever the top 3 vote-getting ideas are, and they have thumbs up and thumbs down on all these ideas, they bring the person who submitted the idea into they call it a V1 lab, and they build soup to nuts the idea in a day. And every quarter they do that. I thought it was a really elegant way of kind of demonstrating what's possible and stimulating engagement. What do you do to spark the imaginations of your team?
One of the things that we got really excited about last year was this idea of AI ops, where it's kind of like, how do we, so we have an internal goal of getting to 100 million in revenue with less than 150 employees. And that's one from just, I've interviewed all my other startup friends who have gotten well beyond that point. And every time I tell them we're like a 90% company, their eyes kind of glaze over and they get rose colored glasses and like, oh, that's when it was fun. And I asked them all when it stopped being fun, and they all say somewhere around 150 to 200. But also because I just think from a, conservation momentum, like how do you stay nimble and move fast? You want to stay small. And so for that reason, I get really excited about how do we have an internal team that kind of just partners with various other functional teams. Be like, hey, let's almost do like a work consultant-esque mindset of like, let's look at all the stuff you're doing. What's its lowest 20% of value, and how do we automate that with AI or things like that? It turned out to be really challenging actually to do this. And
why so?
I think we found 2 things. One is that like often the scope of these things was like somewhat ill-defined, and having poor scope makes it really hard to build an AI project. I think the other thing we found though is like one of the things we run into building AI features is what I call the LLM treadmill. And the LLM treadmill is like you build something on Gemini 2.0, 2.5 comes out. It's not really forward compatible. You almost have to generally build it again. And oh, by the way, as soon as 2.5 comes out, which came out 6 months after 2.0, Google is now removing capacity from 2.0 very rapidly because there's finite compute in the world, right? Especially GPU compute. So you almost like have to constantly keep this thing up to date.
Software update.
And so, yeah, so like it's the most aggressive EOL cycle I've ever seen in my life, right? Can you imagine you would rebuild a feature every 6 to 9 months? And oh, by the way, you have like 3 weeks to rebuild it, maybe that. I mean, we're in a situation right now, Gemini 3 came out, they're already deprovisioning 2.5 capacity. We don't even have an API for 3.0 yet, right?
Wow.
So like, it's insane. And so a lot of our initial attempts to build stuff internally, we're using these kind of models and we were building internally. And we very quickly found that like, we don't have the capacity to like, for these things that are like nice little, they're not huge movers of ROI, but they're decent little mover of ROI. Wasn't worth it to try to figure out how to keep them up to date. And we just started shifting more into like, great, we're going to just be a buyer of AI products. Lord knows there's enough of them out there, right? So like, why build internally when there's tons of stuff? And we've just instead moved to like, how do we just get better at evaluating AI vendors and getting more rigorous about it?
Instead of having a team to be building, you've decided,
right,
build versus buy, we're going to buy. The challenge is, how do we make buying so easy and so quick that it's frictionless? Is that it, basically?
Yeah, basically. Yeah. I mean, I think probably most folks 18 months ago, we were just buying everything we get our hands on, right? Or it's like, oh yeah, that looks like we're like a kid in the candy store.
And then what's the process to validate?
That's the thing. And I don't think we were as rigorous in process to validate because, I think internally we do a lot of work to validate AI features. We take a lot of pride in the quality of the outputs of our AI. And then I think we learned in the marketplace, that's not always the case. Like,
right.
A lot of vendors don't maybe have that same pride of and so, they'll sell you a thing and you find it like, wild, we can't do that thing. So kind of somewhere in the same way we had to, you have to develop taste and like a really good qualitative QA process for stuff we build internally. We had to do the same thing for stuff we buy. Right. And so
QAing your AI purchases.
Yeah, aggressively. We almost won't buy anything unless you give us a 90-day pilot at a minimum. We just refuse. And we do the same thing for our customers, right? We now assume you won't trust us either, or knows there's enough people. So we do 90-day opt-outs as well, just by default. We make sure we have 90 days to pilot. We make sure we have a test plan. We make sure we know who's going to be testing it, et cetera, et cetera. Versus before, honestly, we were just going to like, the demo looked like it worked, right? Like ship it, put it in front of customers sort of thing. And so it varies from product to product, but we have a lot more rigor in that buy and evaluation process.
You know what's interesting, just as kind of this is a meta observation about innovation in general, but there's a question about what do we have to make really easy? And I think that's a kind of first principle. I gleaned that. I was listening to, if you haven't listened to Jensen's interview on Joe Rogan, which I think just came out this week, it's one of the best interviews I've ever heard. I mean, it's truly fantastic. And Jensen's origin story and NVIDIA's origin story, I mean, it's truly incredible. But one of the things that I'm kind of a sucker for origin stories. So I love hearing how companies get made. And Jensen tells a story I've never heard it written about anywhere, that basically they got to the point that they had a new chip design. They had one purchase order and they knew that the typical way of kind of fabricating was you send your spec to a fab and then they send it back. It almost always is buggy. And then you got to redo it, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, we looked at our cash in the bank. We did not have enough money. We were going to run out of money if we had to go back and forth. So he said, we couldn't do it the traditional way. He said, I had heard of this product called an emulator, which basically would take onto the device your chip specifications and then act like it was the chip. And he said, I said, the only way that we're going to be able to preserve money is if we have an emulator and we do all the QA ourselves. And then we send the final design to the fab and we tell them put it straight into production, which by the way, no one had ever done. He said, so we spent, had you heard this story? I haven't heard this. I mean, it's amazing. He said 50% of our remaining cash is what the emulator cost, 50%. He said, we reached out to the company. They'd gone bankrupt because they didn't have any customers. He said, oh no, I can't buy it. He said, we have one emulator in inventory if you want it. He said, I bought the one they had out of their inventory, despite the fact that they were bankrupt. We did all of our QA on the emulator, and then we sent to TSMC, who was small at the time. We sent them the final design and we said, go directly to production with that design. I have chills because he said it ended up working. And to me, the amazing insight there is recognizing the thing that has to be tested as cheaply as possible is the back and forth, right? In that case, here, you're saying, I don't want what I'm projecting, and I'd love for you to clarify if not, but it sounds like what you realized is it's too difficult to build. We want to buy, and what we got to do is make buying as easy as possible, and then we'll rigorously QA whatever we do buy, but we don't want anybody wasting any time or effort with the, new tool purchase process. Is that an accurate?
100%. Yep.
That's really cool.
100%.
Maybe that's a good time to wrap. I think we're coming to the end of the hour, although it sounds like Jeremy and I have a bunch of more questions. So maybe we can invite you back to the pod another time. I hope we didn't scare you away.
I'd be honored to come on again.
It's super fun to get to talk to you. Thanks for coming on. And,
Yeah, this is super fun.
We love what you're
Thanks for
doing.
having
We
me.
love what you're doing. And hopefully it just drives more spotlight and attention to your great work. Take care. See you.
This is a lot of fun. Thanks,
Take
guys.
care. Thank you so
Bye.
much. Bye now. Mr. Audley, interesting conversation. There's always so interesting to talk to entrepreneurs that are doing something cool because they obviously thought a lot about these things.
Well, what I really like about a couple of the conversations we've had recently, if I think about Ilya, who anticipated ChatGPT, 5 years too early as one example. Richard is similar in that because of the pools he swam in, so to speak, he was anticipating Gen AI long before the rest of us were surprised by it. And to hear him talk about how the kind of structural decisions he made about the product he wanted to build, basically assuming that model makers were going to drop in the engine, the product he wanted to build around that, I thought was a really fascinating approach to company building. And I couldn't help but wonder, we talk a lot about existing enterprises and how they grapple with adoption and things like that. But taking as a premise, models are going to improve. Almost what should we do if we take as a premise models will improve? I think is a very different question, even from what should we do given what's here? And folks right now are still trying to kind of catch up with what's here. And there's a whole kind of other strata of strategy, so to speak, which is what should we do anticipating what's going to come down the pipe?
What I think is such an interesting dilemma that a lot of companies are facing right now, newer and older, is that the first two steps of getting introduced to AI seem to be pretty clear. First, you need to upgrade your capabilities of the organization. And then second, you need to kind of look at what workflows can be done with agents. Those two steps, but they almost all like cost reduction thing. We talked a lot about then what do you do with all this unlocked energy that you might be able to get out of those exercises. And I think there is this chasm between box 1 and box 2 and box 3, which is basically living in this new world where if AI is electricity, you basically went from working before without electricity and now you have a company in an age with electricity. And I think jumping that chasm is complicated. And some people do it as Richard does, where he basically see where the puck will be going. And then he starts to build, towards that already, even if it hasn't been released yet. And I think it's a way of saying the same thing as you are. It's like, you can't just build from the reality there is there today. With the models releasing so fast and getting so much more capabilities every time they come out, you kind of like already have to basically figure out what does GPT 6 or 7 potentially do and make some bets towards that.
It's such a fun and interesting and scary time for strategy, I think, in a way, because the last era has trained folks to think very incrementally about what the business could be. And in an era of uncapped intelligence, as Ilya says, or Dario, maybe one of them says, a country of PhDs in a data center. When you think about that, a country of PhDs or a country of geniuses in a data center are going to be available to you as a company. I mean, what Richard said was, we now have college seniors and doctoral students who have 800 hours a day. That's kind of another way of thinking about it. But very few companies can even allow themselves to imagine, what do we do with somebody who has 800 hours a day, with even if they only had one employee, a fully capable employee that had 800 hours a day?
Let me ask you a question. As I was just saying this other things, I was like, that might actually be wrong, because there is these two competing thoughts that we were just introduced to. We talked about you had to be able to figure out where the puck is going. Richard was talking about that he was building software knowing that at one point he'll be able to run models on the client side, but at the time he couldn't do it. So clearly kind of was seeing where the future is going.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, he and we were kind of freaking out about Jensen's argument about not having long-term plans. So he talked about like he only have a 90-day roadmap. He doesn't do long-term planning, all these different things. How do you think people, and I think I have an answer, maybe I'll just say it. I think it's complicated for people to square up this thing about trying to be visionary of where things are going, but also being nimble enough to kind of work in an agile way. And so there seemed to be this tension, right? And where I kind of come back is to the only thing you can stay true to is to be very good of having a narrative about what you want to be and who do you want to serve, because that can stay consistent. And then you kind of have to have like an overall narrative of like, what is it, what is the change you want to bring to the world? But not in a roadmap terms, but more kind of like targets, like we want to make dogs and the people who love them happy. I say this as a statement, but I really mean it as a question because I think it's just so complicated on long-term strategy where it's just like agile. You shouldn't be an army. You should be like a SEAL team, but you can't think too far ahead because you should really like, how do you see that dilemma?
No, I really agree. I resonate with what you're saying. It reminds me of the Viktor Frankl quote, not to get sober, but someone who has a why can survive any how or any what. I can't remember exactly. I hate to invoke him so kind of superficially, but the why matters a lot. And I think one of the things I took away, a ritual that Richard didn't reference when I asked him about rituals, but he referenced it earlier, is he's meeting with the AI team once a month. And he's told them 60% of the stuff that you do, I hope it comes from my wish list and from the team's wish list, but fully 40% of the stuff you do, I expect you to do because I want you to follow your interestingness, right? To use your word, right? And so the why, obviously it's going to be in service of the mission of the organization, but folks who are tightly coupled to the mission of the organization probably can be given a lot of leash or a lot of leeway to explore lots of different kinds of things. And especially if your expectation is, hey, 50% of the stuff you're going to try isn't going to work. That seems like you've created the conditions to
But I
succeed.
think that statement, and this is why I think increasingly AI is both the capabilities, but it's also a way of thinking, right? That statement is true also because that he talks about basically what seemed to be a Dunbar theory of the firm, right? Which is basically, he believes that a company should be 150 people max. He'd like to get to $100 million of revenue with 150 people. That's why other founders seems that basically the intimacy breaks down or everything gets complicated, right? So he can, I think, deploy all this trust because he kind of understands the 150 people. And he said like 1 out of 4 people was these R&D AI engineers, right? And so let's say like he only have 100 people now, blah, blah. It's probably a handful or 2 people that he has to do. So the trust is probably immense. And so there's this interesting kind of like issue that when we talk about how to think AI, think about how we build our companies with AI, there's these underlying kind of assumptions where a lot of companies, I think, have organizational debt to pay. They don't have trust. They don't have originality. They don't have these other things, entrepreneurship and resourcefulness. They have there's all these things that they probably complaining about that they didn't have in the past, but it didn't really matter as much. But now with AI, it suddenly matters a lot, right? And so it's
Wait, what
fascinating.
matters a lot? Say it again.
I
In the
think
age of AI, what matters a lot?
a lot of these capabilities that I think companies have always had and was envious that startups had, they didn't matter as much as they do now, where more people can do much more with less. So suddenly the issue just becomes much more magnified, and all these kind of hidden issues, bad culture, bad originality or innovation or, creativity, not having people who are resourceful and can do a lot with a little, very clear department structures that means that people don't feel they can go into other swim lanes. All these things that we've all talked about in innovation entrepreneurship in a bigger company context for a long time is now becoming these like super obvious that will also have to be fixed. But what's weird about it is, of course, these are not AI issues. These are secondary AI issues because they become a much bigger problem in an age of AI.
Right. Well said. Well said.
I think that, just to summarize some of the things that at least I got very fascinated about, he basically has a frontline deployed R&D team, which is an interesting way of thinking about it, that basically don't speak in ideas and workshops. They work in code and prototypes. And so I think that was just a fascinating thing to hear about. I think, he talks about the Jenga model, which is basically use AI and use cases
Poke
as their
around.
their Jenga blocks, and you press a little bit and see which loose, and you can kind of pick up easy.
I loved his point there, by the way, about the Hail Mary, that every once in a while you throw a Hail Mary and it works.
Yeah.
And if you aren't throwing those long passes, and if you aren't taking big bets, you don't see the stuff that could surprise you.
And the last thing that really resonated with me, which is kind of also a softy kind of thing, is he said something that people who are not making good products, because of the QA process is broken in the age of AI, but they have this issue because they have no taste. And so it is a super interesting question of who in an organization have the permission to be the one whose taste we're following. And for startups, it's easier because the founder often have like a very big voice. But if you walk into a P&G or whatever, is it the CEO? Is it the CMO? Is the head of strategy? Is the tastemaker? Like, is it all these people that creates consensus? Like, who is this person whose taste we're going to go for? And how do we define that? And I think that's kind of back to this whole point about your narrative is your source code. If you can now make everything, what do you want to make? And what is the thing where your taste picks out and saying, this is the thing that I want to put to the world? And I just find this to be a super fascinating kind of issue and problem to solve for the future.
It was a great conversation. Thanks to Anna Leva for introducing us to Richard, and other listeners. If you have interesting guests that we should be speaking with, put us in touch. We love learning from the folks who are at the front lines.
And for everybody who has been through the whole episode and now listen to the still Debrief, thank you for staying all the way through. And with that, Jeremy, I only have one thing to say, and that is bye-bye.